Kim Di-ho pushed his cleaning cart down the long metal hallway of New Seoul Station. The wheels made a soft squeaking sound as they rolled over the polished floor. Nobody looked at him. Nobody ever looked at him. To the thousands of aliens who walked past him every day, he was just part of the background, like the walls or the ceiling lights. New Seoul Station was huge. It stretched for miles in every direction, with docking bays for massive spaceships and shopping areas filled with creatures from across the galaxy. Some aliens were tall and blue with 4 arms. Others looked like walking crystals that sparkled when they moved. There were furry creatures with big eyes and scaly ones with sharp teeth. All of them were more important than any human. Di-ho had been working here for 23 years. Every morning he woke up in his tiny apartment on level 7 of the workers section. He ate the same breakfast of rice and vegetables. He put on his gray maintenance uniform with his name tag that nobody ever read. Then he took the service elevator down to the supply room to get his cart and his cleaning supplies. His job was simple: clean the floors, empty the trash bins, fix broken lights, wipe down the walls, make sure everything looked perfect for the important visitors who came to trade and make deals. The work was boring, but Di-ho never complained. Humans were lucky to have jobs at all in the galactic community. The Galactic Council had decided long ago that humans were not very smart. They called humans a maintenance species, which meant they were only good for cleaning and fixing things. Most aliens thought humans were like trained animals that could follow simple orders, but could not think for themselves. This made Di-ho angry sometimes, but he kept his feelings hidden. Angry maintenance workers lost their jobs quickly, but while Di-ho cleaned, he watched and listened. When he emptied trash bins in the government offices, he saw the papers that officials threw away. When he mopped floors during late-night meetings, he heard conversations about secret deals. When he fixed communication equipment, he learned how different alien groups talked to each other. After 23 years of being invisible, he knew more about what really happened at New Seoul Station than anyone else. He kept notes about everything he saw and heard. In his small apartment, he had dozens of notebooks filled with names, dates, and details. He wrote about which officials took bribes from smugglers. He recorded when unmarked ships arrived with illegal weapons. He documented how certain alien groups were planning to cheat others in trade deals. Nobody suspected that a simple maintenance worker could read and write so well, or that he would bother to keep track of such things. The corruption at New Seoul Station was everywhere. High-ranking officials sold permits to criminals. Security guards looked the other way when dangerous cargo came through the docks. Even some human supervisors like Park Min-soo took money to ignore problems. Di-ho had seen it all, but nobody would believe him if he tried to report it. Who would listen to a janitor? His only real friend was Lee So-young, who worked in the main cafeteria. She served food to the alien visitors, and like Di-ho, she was mostly invisible to them. Sometimes after their shifts ended, they would sit together in the workers' break room and talk about their day. So-young was one of the few people who knew that Di-ho was much smarter than he appeared. She had seen him reading technical manuals and studying alien languages in his spare time. 3 days ago, something had changed at the station. A fleet of Corvan warships had arrived claiming to be on a diplomatic mission. The Corvans were insect-like creatures with hard shells and sharp claws. They were known throughout the galaxy for being aggressive and violent. Their leader was called Vec Vio, and he was bigger and meaner than the other Corvans. Most people at the station believed the Corvans were just here to negotiate new trade agreements. The news reports said it was a routine diplomatic visit. But Di-ho had noticed things that others missed. He had seen Corvan soldiers mapping the layout of the station. He had watched them test the security systems when they thought nobody was looking. He had overheard conversations where they talked about taking control of important areas. The patterns were familiar to Di-ho. 6 months ago, he had watched the same type of preparations at a mining station near Proxima 7. 2 weeks later, That station had been completely taken over by Corvan forces. The attack had been sudden and brutal. Thousands of innocent beings had been killed or enslaved. The Galactic Council had done nothing to help because they were afraid of starting a war with the Corvan Empire. Now, Deo could see the same thing happening at New Sol Station. The Corvans were not here for diplomacy. They were here to conquer. They planned to take control of one of the most important trade hubs in the galaxy. Once they controlled New Sol Station, they could threaten dozens of nearby worlds. Daiho had tried to warn people, but nobody would listen. When he told a security officer about his concerns, the alien had laughed at him. When he approached his human supervisor Park Min-soo, the man had told him to mind his own business and stick to cleaning. Even So Young thought he was being too paranoid when he explained his fears to her. The problem was that nobody took humans seriously. To most aliens, humans were just simple creatures who could mop floors and carry boxes. The idea that a human maintenance worker could understand military strategy or recognize invasion patterns seemed impossible to them. They looked at Daiho in his gray uniform with his cleaning cart and saw nothing threatening or important. But Daiho knew he was right about the Corvans. His 23 years of careful observation had taught him to recognize the signs of trouble. He had learned to read body language and voice patterns of dozens of different alien species. He understood how criminals and soldiers behaved when they were planning something dangerous. Most importantly, he had access to every part of the station through his maintenance duties. Tomorrow the Corvan attack would begin. Daiho was sure of it. He had seen the final preparations being made. Equipment was being moved into position. Soldiers were getting ready for battle. Communications were being tested. All the signs pointed to an assault starting at dawn. Since nobody would listen to his warnings, Daiho decided he would have to act alone. He could not stop the entire Corvan army, but he could make their victory much more difficult. He knew every secret passage, every security weakness, and every system that kept the station running. If the Corvans wanted to conquer New Sol Station, they would have to fight the most dangerous opponent they had never bothered to notice. The invisible maintenance worker was about to become very visible indeed. Daiho could not sleep that night. He lay on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling of his small apartment, while his mind raced with plans. The Corvan attack would begin in less than 12 hours, and he was the only person who knew it was coming. The weight of that knowledge felt heavy on his chest, like a stone pressing down on his ribs. At 3 in the morning, he gave up trying to rest. He got dressed in his maintenance uniform and gathered the supplies he would need for what came next. From under his bed, he pulled out a box containing his most important notebooks. These books held 23 years of observations about the station, its security systems, and the people who worked there. Tonight this information would finally be useful. His first stop was the residential section where the human officers lived. Captain Sarah Chun was one of the few high-ranking humans at New Sol Station, and more importantly, she was one of the few who had ever treated maintenance workers with basic respect. When Daiho had to repair the lighting in her office, she always said thank you. When she saw him in the hallways, she nodded politely instead of looking through him like he was invisible. Using his master access card, Daiho slipped into the residential building through a service entrance. The hallways were dark and quiet as he made his way to Captain Chin's quarters on the 7th floor. He had prepared a detailed letter explaining everything he had observed about the Corvan preparations. The letter included specific ship registration numbers, troop movement patterns, and communication frequencies he had recorded over the past 3 days. He slid the envelope under her door and moved on to his next target. Lieutenant Park Ji-hoon was a security officer who worked the night shift in the main control room. Daiho had noticed that Park actually paid attention to his surroundings, unlike most of the other guards who spent their time watching entertainment videos on their personal devices. Park might be smart enough to understand the warning and act on it. The letter he left for Park contained different information focused on the security vulnerabilities that the Corvans had been studying. Daeho had watched Corvin soldiers testing response times at various checkpoints. He had seen them mapping the locations of weapon storage areas and communication hubs. All of this intelligence went into the letter along with suggestions for defensive preparations. His third stop was the quarters of Dr. Kim the Jin, who ran the medical facility. If fighting broke out, the hospital would be overwhelmed with casualties. Dr. Kim was known for being practical and efficient. She would not waste time questioning the source of information if it could help her save lives. Daeho left her a list of medical supplies to stockpile and safe areas where wounded civilians could be evacuated. But leaving anonymous warnings was only the first part of his plan. While the officers tried to make sense of his letters, Daeho began the more dangerous work of preparing the station itself for battle. He knew every pipe, conduit, and system that kept New Seoul Station running. Tonight he would turn that infrastructure into weapons. His first target was the Environmental Control Center in the lower levels of the station. Using his maintenance access codes, he reprogrammed the air circulation systems in several key areas. Tomorrow, when the Corvins tried to secure these strategic locations, they would find themselves breathing sleeping gas instead of normal air. The gas would not kill them, but it would make them drowsy and slow to react. Next, he visited the main power distribution hub. This was where electricity flowed from the station's fusion reactors to every system throughout the massive facility. Daeho carefully rerouted several power conduits so that at the press of a button he could create electrical overloads in areas where Corvin troops were likely to gather. The overloads would disable their equipment and create chaos during their assault. The communication center was his most ambitious target. This room contained the equipment that allowed New Seoul Station to talk with ships throughout the galaxy. Daeho had studied these systems for years while performing routine maintenance. He knew exactly how to plant a virus in the communication network that would broadcast everything on Corvin military frequencies to news stations across the galaxy. When the attack began, the entire universe would be watching. As he worked through the night, Daeho felt both fear and excitement. For 23 years he had been powerless, watching corruption and injustice happen all around him. Tonight he was finally fighting back. The skills he had learned through decades of invisible labor were about to become weapons against those who had dismissed him as harmless. Around 4 in the morning, he encountered another person in the service tunnels. So Young was walking toward him carrying a bag of tools and looking determined. She had found him in the communication center earlier, and instead of reporting him or asking questions, she had simply asked how she could help. Now she was ready to join his invisible rebellion. Together they expanded the scope of their preparations. So Young knew the cafeteria systems better than anyone, and she had access to food and water supplies throughout the station. While Daeho continued working on mechanical systems, she began adding harmless but effective compounds to the Corvin food stores. The chemicals would not poison the insect warriors, but would make them violently sick to their stomachs. They also began reaching out to other maintenance workers who were starting their early morning shifts. Young Tae-min, who worked in waste disposal, agreed to help after So Young explained what was happening. Lee Sang-ho from the loading dock joined them when he learned about the planned attack. Within 2 hours, they had assembled a network of 12 humans who knew every secret passage and hidden system on the station. The beauty of their operation was that nobody paid attention to maintenance workers doing their jobs. Corvin soldiers saw humans mopping floors and emptying trash bins, but never wondered what those humans might be thinking or planning. The invisibility that had frustrated Daeho for so many years was now his greatest advantage. By 6 in the morning, their preparations were complete. The station looked exactly the same as always, but hidden throughout its structure were dozens of traps and surprises waiting for the Corvin invasion force. When Thek Voa and his soldiers made their move, they would discover that conquering New Seoul Station would be much more difficult than they had planned. Daeho returned to his apartment to shower and change clothes. In 2 hours he would report for his regular shift as if nothing had happened. He would push his cleaning cart through the hallways and empty trash bins just like every other day. But this time when the Corvins attacked, they would learn that the most dangerous enemy is often the one you never notice until it is too late. The attack began exactly when Deho had predicted it would. At dawn, the first wave of Corvin soldiers moved through the main corridors of New Seoul Station, expecting an easy victory. What they found instead was chaos and confusion that turned their careful plans into a nightmare. In Section 7, near the main power hub, 20 Corvin warriors suddenly found themselves choking on sleeping gas that poured from the air vents above their heads. The gas was odorless and invisible, but within seconds, the insect soldiers were stumbling around, unable to think clearly. Their commander tried to call for backup, but his communication device had mysteriously stopped working. Captain Chun had read Daeho's warning letter 3 times before deciding to act on it. She had gathered her small security team and positioned them in exactly the locations the anonymous note had suggested. When Corvin troops tried to take control of the weapon storage facility, they walked straight into a trap. Chun's officers were waiting with energy rifles and stun grenades, ready for battle. The Corvin advance was failing everywhere at once. In the docking bay, their assault ships found themselves unable to land because someone had reprogrammed the landing systems. In the communication center, their jamming equipment was useless because the station's transmitters were broadcasting on frequencies they had never expected. Most frustrating of all, their weapons kept malfunctioning at critical moments. Vekvar stood in the main command center screaming orders at his subordinates, but nothing was going according to plan. His soldiers reported that corridors were flooding with water for no apparent reason. Elevators were stopping between floors and trapping troops inside. Gravity generators were creating pockets of zero gravity that sent warriors floating helplessly toward the ceiling. The Corvin commander could not understand what was happening. His intelligence reports had assured him that New Seoul Station had weak defenses and lazy security forces. The humans who worked there were supposed to be simple-minded creatures who would surrender without a fight. Instead, someone had turned the entire station into a weapon aimed at his invasion force. What Vekvo did not know was that 12 maintenance workers were moving through hidden passages like ghosts, appearing to strike at his soldiers and vanishing before they could be caught. Jung Tae-min used his knowledge of the waste disposal system to flood Corvin positions with sewage. Lee Sang-ho trapped enemy troops in cargo containers using the loading dock machinery. Every human worker had become a one-person sabotage unit. Daeho himself was having the time of his life. For 23 years he had walked these corridors, invisible and powerless, while watching injustice happen all around him. Now he was using every skill he had learned and every secret he had discovered to fight back against those who had dismissed him as harmless. His favorite trick was using the lighting system to confuse Corvin soldiers. The insect warriors relied heavily on their compound eyes to navigate, but Daeho had programmed the lights to strobe at frequencies that disrupted their vision. Entire squads of Corvins found themselves stumbling around in corridors that seemed to twist and change before their eyes. So Young was proving to be just as dangerous as Daeho had hoped. She had used her access to the food service areas to do something brilliant and terrible. The compounds she had added to Corvin food supplies were making the warriors violently allergic to their own chemical communication system. Corvin soldiers normally coordinated attacks by releasing pheromones that told other Corvins what to do. Now when they tried to communicate this way, they broke out in painful rashes and could not think straight. The virus that Daeho had planted in the communication system was broadcasting everything to news networks across the galaxy. Beings on hundreds of worlds were watching live coverage of the Corvin attack and seeing how it was failing. The mighty Corvin Empire that had conquered dozens of planets was being defeated by maintenance workers and janitors. Dr. Kim had received Daeho's warning and prepared her medical facility for casualties. But instead of treating wounded humans, She found herself dealing with Corvan soldiers who were sick from contaminated food or injured from malfunctioning equipment. The irony was not lost on her as she worked to save the lives of invaders who had planned to enslave everyone on the station. Lieutenant Park had taken the security intelligence seriously and coordinated with Captain Chun to set up defensive positions. But most of the fighting was being done by people who were not soldiers at all. The maintenance staff had turned New Seoul Station into a maze of traps and surprises that no military academy had ever taught anyone how to handle. By midday, the Corvan invasion was falling apart completely. Vec Vor had lost contact with half his forces, and the other half were reporting impossible problems. His elite warriors were being outsmarted by beings he had considered barely intelligent. The news broadcasts were making him look like a fool in front of the entire galaxy. The worst moment came when Vec Vor tried to retreat to his command ship, only to discover that someone had reprogrammed the docking bay computers. His ship was trapped by mechanical arms that held it in place, while emergency systems blared warnings about non-existent safety violations. He was stuck on a station that had become his prison. Meanwhile, Deho was making his way toward the main computer core, where all of the station systems could be controlled. He had one final surprise prepared for the Corvan commander, and it would end this invasion once and for all. The invisible maintenance worker was about to become very visible indeed, behind him. So Young and the other workers continued their guerrilla campaign against the confused and demoralized Corvan forces. They moved through service tunnels and maintenance shafts like they owned the place, because in a very real sense they did. This was their home and their workplace, and no one knew it better than the people who kept it running every single day. The most dangerous humans in the galaxy were proving to be the ones that everyone had overlooked, and the Corvan Empire was about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The Corvan invasion collapsed completely within 6 hours. But the real trouble was just beginning for Deho and the other humans. News of what they had done spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communication could carry it. Every government and military force in known space suddenly wanted to know how creatures they had classified as harmless laborers had destroyed an elite Corvan assault force. 3 days after the failed attack, a massive ship arrived at New Seoul Station. It belonged to the Galactic Council and carried representatives from dozens of different species. They demanded that the humans responsible for the resistance be brought before them for questioning. The message was clear, even though they used polite diplomatic language. Someone was going to pay for embarrassing the established order. Deho found himself standing in the council chambers, wearing his gray maintenance uniform and still smelling like cleaning chemicals. Around him sat beings from across the galaxy, all of them staring at the small human who had made fools of the mighty Corvan Empire. Some looked curious, others looked angry, and a few looked genuinely frightened. Chancellor Vex Primo was a gas creature who spoke through crystal resonators that made her voice sound like music played on broken instruments. She floated above the other council members in a containment field that shimmered with different colors. When she spoke, the entire chamber fell silent. She wanted to know how humans had learned so much about Corvan military operations. The question sounded innocent, but Deho understood what she was really asking. The council suspected that humans were spies working for enemy governments. They could not believe that maintenance workers had figured out invasion plans just by paying attention, taking notes. Deho told them the truth, even though he knew they would not like it. For 23 years he had simply done his job while everyone around him acted like he did not exist. He had cleaned offices during secret meetings, emptied trash cans full of classified documents, and repaired equipment. While officials discussed plans they thought no maintenance worker could understand. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled representatives. Every species suddenly realized that their most sensitive locations were regularly visited by humans. They had never considered a security risk. Decades of secrets had been overheard by janitors, repair workers, and food service staff who were treated as invisible furniture, the Altarian trade. Minister actually fainted when he realized that his cleaning lady, Kim Mi-jin, had been present. For every meeting where he discussed stealing money meant for refugee assistance. The Centauri defense coordinator turned pale blue when he remembered all the times human technicians had worked on communication equipment during top-secret military briefings, but the galaxy's reaction was not just embarrassment, several aggressive. Species saw the human resistance as proof that the maintenance species classification had been a dangerous mistake. The hegemony of Kresh began demanding that humans be relocated to prison planets, where they could not overhear sensitive information. The Synthetic Collective suggested that all humans should have their memories wiped clean every few months. The Draconian Empire went even further. Their representative was a scaled creature with burning red eyes who spoke in a voice like grinding metal. He declared that humans were clearly too intelligent and too dangerous to be allowed freedom in civilized space. His government wanted all humans to be fitted with neural control devices that would prevent them from thinking about anything more complex than basic work tasks. So Young had been called to testify as well, and she stood beside Daeho facing the council with quiet dignity. When the Draconian representative finished his threatening speech, she stepped forward and reminded the assembly of something important. Humans had used their knowledge not to conquer worlds or overthrow governments, but to prevent a massacre of innocent beings. She pointed out that maintenance workers throughout the galaxy had access to information that could be sold to criminals or used for blackmail. They could have become rich by trading secrets or powerful by threatening to expose corruption. Instead, they had used what they learned to save lives and protect the weak. The question was not whether humans were dangerous, but whether the galaxy was finally ready to treat them with the respect they deserved. Her words created an uncomfortable silence in the chamber. Many of the representatives knew that their governments were corrupt and that their secrets were shameful. They had been comfortable with this situation only because they believed no one was watching or listening. Now they had to face the fact that someone had been taking notes all along. The debate that followed lasted for 3 days. Some species wanted to punish humans for daring to pay attention. Others argued that humans had proven themselves to be valuable allies who could help maintain peace and security. A few representatives suggested that the real problem was not human intelligence, but the corruption and injustice that humans had been forced to witness. During the debates, Daeho was kept under guard in a small room with no windows. He was not technically a prisoner, but he was not free to leave either. Food was brought to him by nervous-looking aliens who acted like they were feeding a dangerous animal. None of them would make eye contact or speak to him directly. He spent the time writing in a notebook that So Young had smuggled to him. If he was going to be imprisoned or executed, he wanted to leave behind a record of everything he had seen and learned. The notebook contained names, dates, and details about corruption throughout the galactic government. It was his insurance policy and his final gift to the human race. On the 3rd day, Captain Chun was allowed to visit him. She brought news from the outside that was both good and bad. The good news was that several progressive governments had offered to hire human intelligence analysts and security consultants. The bad news was that other species had banned humans from their territories entirely and were demanding that existing human workers be removed immediately. The galaxy was splitting into 2 camps. One side saw humans as valuable partners who had proven their loyalty and competence. The other side saw them as a threat that needed to be controlled or eliminated. The maintenance miracle that had saved New Sol Station was forcing the entire galactic community to choose between fear and respect. When the council finally reached its decision, Daeho was brought back to the chamber to hear his fate. The vote had been close, but the progressives had won by a narrow margin. Humans would no longer be classified as a maintenance species, but their new status came with both opportunities and dangers that would change everything. 6 months after the Corvin incident, The galaxy had settled into an uneasy new reality that nobody was completely happy with. Humans were no longer classified as maintenance species, but their new status as intelligence-capable beings came with both amazing opportunities and terrible dangers that changed everything for everyone. Some governments led by the Progressive Centauri Alliance began actively recruiting humans as security consultants and intelligence analysts. They offered good salaries, comfortable living conditions, and most importantly, they offered respect. For the first time in galactic history, humans were being asked for their opinions about important matters, instead of just being told what to clean. But other species reacted with fear and hostility. The militant Draconian Empire banned all humans from their territory and expelled the thousands of human workers who had been living there for generations. The hegemony of Kresh created special restricted zones where humans were allowed to work, but only under constant surveillance. Several smaller governments simply closed their borders to humans entirely. Daiho himself had received job offers from dozens of different organizations. The Galactic Security Force wanted him to head their new Human Intelligence Division. 3. Major corporations offered him positions as Director of Operational Security with salaries that would have made him wealthy beyond his dreams. Even some criminal organizations tried to recruit him, promising unlimited resources and no questions asked about his methods. He turned them all down. Instead, he returned to New Sol Station, but not as a maintenance worker. Captain Chun, who had been promoted to station administrator after proving her competence during the crisis, appointed him as Director of Threat Assessment. It was a fancy title for someone who still spent his days walking corridors and watching for things that other people missed. The job was perfect for Daiho because it let him do what he had always done best. He observed patterns, noted unusual behavior, and identified potential problems before they became serious threats. The difference now was that people listened when he spoke and acted on his recommendations. His reports went directly to the highest levels of station management and galactic security forces. The maintenance workers throughout the galaxy had formed an informal network they called the Invisible. They shared information about corruption, potential security threats, and opportunities to help innocent people escape dangerous situations. They were not spies in the traditional sense, because they were not working for any government or organization. They were simply people doing honest work who happened to see everything that went on around them. So Young had become something of a celebrity, traveling between worlds to speak about the dignity of labor and the importance of treating all beings with basic respect. Her speeches were incredibly popular with working-class beings of every species, but they made politicians and business leaders extremely uncomfortable. She had a gift for pointing out that the same people who kept civilization running were the ones everyone pretended not to see. Her most famous speech was given on the Centauri homeworld to an audience of 50,000 beings from dozens of different species. She talked about how every person, regardless of their job or social status, deserved to be treated as an intelligent being capable of thought and feeling. The speech was broadcast throughout the galaxy and inspired similar movements on hundreds of worlds. The Corvan Empire never recovered from the humiliation of their failed invasion. Vekvu had been executed by his own people for the military disaster, but the damage to their reputation was permanent. Other aggressive species began to wonder if their own maintenance workers were also taking careful notes about military plans and government secrets. Several planned conquests were quietly abandoned when military leaders realized they had no idea what their custodial staff might know about their operations. The hegemony of Kresh canceled an invasion of the Tau Ceti system after discovering that their cleaning crews were all members of the Invisible Network. The fear of being embarrassed by janitors was keeping the peace better than any treaty or military alliance, but not everything had changed for the better. The galaxy had become more divided than ever before. Progressive worlds that welcomed human intelligence workers found themselves in constant conflict with conservative species that saw humans as a dangerous threat. Trade relationships broke down, diplomatic missions were recalled, and several regions were on the verge of open warfare. Some humans struggled with their new status as much as the aliens did. After generations of being told they were only good for simple manual labor, many found it difficult to believe they were capable of complex thinking. Others became angry and bitter about the years of mistreatment they had endured. A few even joined extremist groups that wanted to use human intelligence capabilities to seek revenge against species that had oppressed them. Deho worried about these developments, but he remained focused on his work at New Sol Station. He still lived in his small apartment, still wore simple clothes, and still preferred to remain unnoticed when possible. The main difference was that now when he walked through the station corridors, he occasionally caught people watching him with a mixture of respect, fear, and curiosity. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about the danger of underestimating those who seem powerless and harmless. The most dangerous beings were not always the ones with the biggest weapons or the loudest voices. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the quiet one in the corner, who nobody bothered to notice until it was too late. Young humans throughout the galaxy were growing up in a world where their intelligence was recognized and their contributions were valued. They would never know what it felt like to be treated as invisible furniture, the way Deho's generation had been. But they would also inherit the responsibility of proving that human intelligence could be trusted and used for good rather than evil. The quiet revolution that had begun with one maintenance worker taking notes in his spare time had grown into a galaxy-wide movement that changed the relationship between every species in civilized space. It proved that true power often belonged to those who paid attention, while everyone else assumed they were too simple to understand what was happening around them. Deho had shown the universe that the most dangerous human was indeed the one everyone overlooked, and now that the galaxy knew such humans existed, they could never again make the mistake of thinking that being ignored meant being harmless.